So I had to interview Brendan Calder for my podcast. Brendan is the founder of a company I talk about extensively in my books, my blog posts, and my video blogs. And it's the company where I say I've never worked harder, had more fun, or felt more appreciated. Brendan is a serial entrepreneur who's currently a professor at the Rotman School of Management. He is so much fun to talk to, and in our interview, he shares stories, management advice, as well as wisdom. I am sure you're going to enjoy this interview. So welcome, Brendan. It is so great to have you here. Brendan is a serial entrepreneur. He's also the professor of management at Rotman School of Business, as well as the chair of the Hotels Center for Integrative Thinking at Rotman. And most importantly, I talk a lot in my books and in my blog post about how I used to work for this organization. And I said, it's the place where I felt like I worked the hardest, felt the most appreciated, and had the most fun. And that was one of Brendan's companies. So I had to have Brendan on. So welcome, Brendan.
There was a treat. There was a treat when you called me up, and we hadn't talked since you were in the MBA program, the EMBA programs. We hadn't talked in a while. So it's good to see you again and good to talk to you again.
Great. So I have to ask you, so after such a long time as a business leader, what led you into business school? What is it that appealed to you?
Well, I wasn't looking for it. At the turn of the century, that's this century, readers and listeners, this century we're talking about, which is 22 years ago, I had spent 30 years on Bay Street, and I, I was, was this all there is? Is this all there is? And I decided to leave, but I wasn't going anywhere. I had a motorcycle, and I used to hike, and I did mountains and everything like that. So I had lots to do, and people to see, things to do. Had a couple of kids, had a wife of at that time 30 years. It's now 50 years. A lot of work to be done, and so I just stopped. I quit. I threw my own going away party. Absolutely, boy. Never let that organization do a going away party for you.
Well, it's going to be done right when you do it yourself, right?
Yeah, and I did it at the Horseshoe Tavern, and the invite was, if you ever work with Brendan, you're welcome to come. And it was a good party. And that was in the year 2000. So then I started doing motorcycle trips and hikes and things like that. And I got a phone call from Roger Martin, who had just been hired a year earlier at the Rotman School. It had just been named the Rotman School. It used to be the University of Toronto Business School. And they found a fellow by the name of Joe Rotman, who I'd worked with, and he funded it, named it. And they found Roger Martin, and they brought him, convinced him to stop being a management consultant at early 40s, to come and build this school, because it was a no-name school. And he came. He found me, and he wanted me to come to help him build it, because he had heard that I was customer-oriented. And you do whatever you want with everything you're hearing. Anybody that's listening to this thing, business schools are usually run as universities. They're run by professors for professors.
Yep. Okay. Academics. Yes.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to actually build a business school, a top 10 business school that actually makes a difference, other than research, with the people working, you got to organize around the students. And so I helped them do that. It was supposed to be a 3-year gig, because I had nowhere else to go. I had a corporation. I was a board director of corporations. And I'd said no to a couple of startups that I just wasn't in the mood to do. And I went. And that was 22 years ago.
Wow. So that's a long 3-year stretch. Sounds like you're liking it.
Yeah, and four deans. Actually, I'm on my 4th dean.
Nice.
But this is the year that I've actually given notice that I will leave at the end of the academic year, which is in June. You have to have permission to leave. You have to ask for permission to retire.
Okay. Good to know.
And they gave it to me.
Nice. So we're going to talk a little bit about what your next chapter is going to look like. Okay. But what I wanted to ask you, so in terms of doing that switch from Bay Street over to business school, so I know that we're both fans of Peter Drucker, and one of my favorite books is The Effective Executive, which I've read more times than I can remember, written in 1966. And today, every page of that book is as relevant today as it was when it was written, I'm sure. So I just want to ask you, based on your experience in leadership, do you see any fundamental differences between leadership when you first were starting out as a leader versus what you're seeing today with students in business school?
Well, and I started off just after he wrote that book because it was one of the first books I found when I found myself in a position of leadership. I don't use the word leadership. It's like Mother Nature. It's like it's motherhood. Everybody says it. Nobody knows what the hell it means. So I don't use it very much. You can be a leader in a position of leadership. It means you're in a position to lead. That means usually you have people that you can influence. So a position of leadership. He talks about being an effective executive, not an effective leader. And so leadership is, now I have adjusted because that's the way the world is. And I now use leader manager a little more, but I would focus more on the word manager, which is output oriented. Okay. Yep. There's nothing wrong with the word leader and leadership. It does mean making something happen. It's just a little loosey goosey. Whereas, but the fundamentals are the same. When you're in a position of leadership, you're in a position to lead. I influence the outputs of your organization, 2 or more people. Okay. Then the fundamentals are the same. They are actually the same. They're actually the same. And this guy, and I didn't mention this to you before, Dion, but he also wrote this book.
Yep, he wrote several.
Bible.
Yeah,
it is a Bible on management, and none of this has changed. He wrote this in the mid '80s. Now it was revised after he died about 10 years ago, and forward by Jim Collins. So this is right up to date with his stuff, his words, but done in a way that you realize it's not 40 years old.
Okay,
so
nice.
The fundamentals have stayed the same. I won't go into them all, but nothing's changed. I mean, the fundamentals have stayed. Now, the good news is you've got more toys. Like we got this. You don't even have to go to work. Okay, you don't have to go to work. You got so the fundamentals are the same. Once the fundamentals are decide what you want to get done, figure out what you need to get it done. Mostly the people matter the most, and then work with those people to get it done. By the way, that's the name of the course that's lasted 22 years at the Rotman School.
Well, that's actually my very next question, because I know that it started when you were talking about you were bringing that business mind into business school, where to your point, it is usually led by academics. So it's really bringing that business focus to people who are going to be the future business leaders. And I know that your course, Getting It Done, has been an award-winning course for, is it 22 years?
We're just about to do our 22nd year, yeah.
Yes. So what prompted you to launch that course once you joined Rotman?
Okay. Well, I joined Rotman to actually manage the programs from the student point of view, not the content or professors, but getting the students in and making sure that they were treated well, and then making sure that they had easy access to jobs. All the stuff in the middle was what professors were adding the content. But so early, I was there 4 or 5 months, I guess. Oh, less than that, 2 or 3 months. And 3 students, JD MBAs, they were joint lawyer taking law and MBA. They walked in my office, and they had a beautiful line that I use all the time now. They come into my office and they said, Brendan, and I was a Brendan, I was not Mr. or anything like that. Brendan, where do we learn about management at the Rotman School of Management? This is not the Rotman School of Business. It's the Rotman School of Management. It's the Faculty of Management at the University of Toronto. They even knew a zillion years ago management was a good word. Okay.
Yes.
And but what a question! Where do you learn about management at the Rotman School of Management? When you looked at the
curriculum,
courses, there were finance courses. Well, you did it. There were finance courses. There was HR courses. There was this course. There was strategy courses. There's very little bit of it that had the word management all by itself. So I was doing a capstone day for another prof, a guy named David Beatty, on strategy, and he'd asked me to come to do the capstone the last day. To which I asked him, I said, you want me to come on the 14th day of the course through the year, after you've done strategy for 13 of the sessions? So I teach them how I do strategy, tell them. I said, no, stupid. I want you to tell them how to get it done, how to get your strategy done, how to make it happen.
Right.
So that's where the phrase came from, getting it done. It was the strategy. So I invited these 3 JD MBAs to my Saturday session, which would happen to be coming up. And they went nuts. They said, we got to have it. And I said, you make it. I said, you make it happen and I'll be there. And they did. They got the course as an experimental course. They got the course so they get a credit. And we took that semester, and it was me, and we brought in one more, me and 4 guys. And we did a couple of people from management consulting that I knew that were doing this kind of stuff, and they did the course. And then that was the first one. Now it's longest lasting, most awarded MBA elective.
Awesome. And it's about action orientation. And even when I talk about the time when I was working at your company, that's really what it was about. It was always output oriented. Everybody, I remember, no matter what role you had, how junior or senior, it was very clear what you needed to do every day to be able to turn whatever output the organization needed to be successful. Our scorecards reflected that. And that was so impactful in terms of making sure that everybody felt like, they were contributing. They were important. If you don't get up and you show up tomorrow, that's going to make a difference. So that was very valuable.
Yeah. And you asked earlier about the fundamentals. Here's another fundamental that hasn't changed, and it's sad. It takes discipline to do that. And people still don't have the discipline to do it. They just talk about it. They talk about it. They talk about it. Especially when you throw in the word leadership. You can make it last another hour and a half when you throw in the word leadership, okay? But if you actually have the discipline to do exactly what you just said and keep the discipline of doing it, what you felt, it's amazing what gets done. And it's the right things done. Getting it done is getting the right things done.
And I just want to point out another aspect to it as well is I've been in situations where I've had scorecards where honestly, they were probably like 25 different things. Half of them were very, kind of, okay, what does that really mean? What exactly do I have to do? And that can be very frustrating because then you show up at your performance appraisal and it's very subjective, right? And it's like, well, I think I did that. I'm not sure. But really making things as tangible as possible, and also the respect I felt for as an employee of, I know you can't focus on 25 things every single day and do 25 things really well. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure it's very clear to you what your focus needs to be. Yes, there are other things too, but you only need a few things, and it's the big stuff. The big stuff will make a difference.
Yeah, and then actually you'll remember when I remind you, we didn't call ours a scorecard. That was a bunch of accountants that some HR people got excited about, and they started doing scorecards. All of a sudden, you got a piece of paper from HR that said, "Here's your scorecard." What we had, and you might remember the phrase, a performance agreement. It was an agreement between you and your, we now use the word team leader instead of boss. Team leader, you were a team member and your team leader, and it was an agreement on for your performance. And we did it in terms of effectiveness areas, KIPs, key result areas, and you ended up coming up with objectives, agreeing together ahead of time. They were smart objectives, not just loosey-goosey. And then you had to, I don't know if you remember, you had to weight them. So everyone had to be 5% minimum.
That was the most important part.
And you found out what your top 3 were. Absolutely. And then you also got the piece of magic. You had a link between how big your bonus was going to be if you actually did it on a weighted average.
And it was very clear.
There was no subjectivity other than, around the edges a little bit. And then then there was a checkpoint every 4 months. You got 2 checkpoints and then the performance appraisal. That's what worked.
But it also helps with prioritization, right? Because
absolutely,
there are always a million things that are on the go at any given day. So knowing that these are my 3 top things is so critical in making sure that what we're focusing on is what we need to focus on.
Absolutely.
So yes, and I think I shared with you that you completely set me up because I just assumed, because I was very early in my career that I was working there, and I just assumed everywhere operates like that. So it was a very rude awakening after I moved on and I started to do other things. Great places, not so great places, but not everywhere was like that. But what it did do, because I had that experience so early, is I really understood that this is possible. Not only is it possible from an employee engagement and fulfillment perspective, but from an effectiveness, delivering the outputs, being successsul. So I always knew that. From the outset, it wasn't just like an airy fairy, books and
no. And it does take courage to actually practice this stuff, even with an organization that understands it, but especially with organizations that don't understand it, because you can't change everything. But you can. You are the boss of you. You are the boss of you. Okay.
Absolutely.
And you can you manage yourself? In fact, that's one of his other famous books called Managing Oneself. And those fundamentals will never go away. They'll just never go away. Unless you're a little rich kid or you got lucky someday. Well, that's fine. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But if you actually wanted to get things, in fact, I just had a meeting this morning with one of my graduate students who comes from a big family, successful family, and he's right now on his own, and he's understanding these things because
Nice.
there will be no
Right.
culture out there. He has to do it, start it himself, and it's fun.
So talking about other fundamentals that I learned from you, one of the other keys that you've always talked about is to always be focused on helping people solve their problems. And that has been, I just wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about how that has really been a successful practice for you throughout your career
Right.
and finding success.
The well, you start out with the premises. No one's interested in you. Okay, I mean, they're not when you want something. They're really thinking about themselves. They're thinking about how do I survive? How do I fit? And everything like that. And so, if you start with a mindset, it's called listener train of thought. If you start with a mindset that says, "I'm going to be talking to somebody, and if I understand where they're coming from their point of view in the situation, and I help them get through this, it'll work. It'll work better." So listener train of thought. So you come up with in the mind, what is their train of thought here? If it's a subordinate or if it's a peer, or especially if it's somebody above, you go in there not demanding what you want or what you need or here's what I want. No. You start off asking, say, what is the issue here? What is the issue? What is the concern you have? What is the problem you have? And then you put some energy into there saying, how do we solve that problem? And then you're working with them. And it's just easier because no one does what they're told. You can't go in there and tell them to do things because no one does what they're told.
Right. And it's true. It's not just for people who are more senior than you. It's also for your team members too.
Absolutely. And you might be wrong. In fact, it's better not to go tell people what to do. Okay. Now, sure, if they're about to crash and dive over a cliff, you say, hey, no, why don't you pull it back a little bit for a little while we talk. Okay. So they, pick them up at the bottom of the cliff. That's too hard. It's better to make sure they don't go over the cliff. But everybody innately wants to achieve. They really do want to achieve. They want to go home at night feeling good about they did something and were useful. Okay. Not that all their friends like them. Not that they got even with somebody. I mean, they want to. What did I achieve today? What did I move the ball forward a little bit? And you help them do that. And it's amazing. Not only does it get a lot of things done, it creates. In other words, it's overused, but if you use it right, loyalty. I mean, when there's a when there's a chance for that person to go one way versus the other, they'll err on the side of someone that they owe some loyalty to, that they owe something to because of that relationship, and that's how you build it up. Absolutely. It's not through command and control; it's through this involvement.
And building relationships. So I have one more question for you before we go on to find out what you're going to be doing next. And that is, when I was searching around online, seeing what people are saying about you, one of the numbers I've been doing my research.
I haven't done it. Where do you find this? Okay, go ahead.
But one of the comments that came up that recurred the most is they talked about how good you are at building leaders and succession planning. So I was just going to ask you a question. So when you're looking for somebody, like when you looking for somebody who has whatever that is, who's going to be a strong leader, what specific types of things do you look for when you see it? You're like, yes, this person is going to be good in a management role.
Because I always used to hire managers, of course. The actual specialists were usually somebody else's thing, but they were managers. First of all, I did look at what had they already achieved, okay? Because I didn't have time to. We weren't a big organization. We were always building. We were lean and keen, not lean and mean, lean and keen, and we weren't into training programs or anything like that. I mean, we weren't into training programs. The whole day was a training program. We weren't into training programs. We didn't even have a management training program. We just said, "Here's how you get ahead. Do this, then this, then this, boom," as opposed to do that and do that. And it was this and this, and we. I would look, this would be personally, I would look at what they'd already achieved. Mm-hmm. Usually they found, either we went after them because we thought they were the right person, or they found us. And then you look at them and ask them how they actually dealt with things. And if they were, if you could tell that they weren't focused on themselves alone, if there was any indication that they really were involved with the situation, as opposed to, I did this, I changed this, I did this, I did that. If there was a lot more, this is where we had to do things. It's way more than that went the right way. And then, of course, I collaborated with I never ever hired someone on my own. There was always a collaboration with the people that this new person would have to work with. And that's what makes it work. That's what makes it work. But you make sure they have the skills. Now, on startups, you don't look for the nicest person that you can live with when you need a programmer that can program 47 things in 3 hours. Get someone that can program 47 things in 3 hours, okay? And that's what they want, okay? That's what they want. What do they need? How do you make it work? And that's what they need, okay? Because that's what you need. So startups, it's very more focused on skills only, very specific skills. Like you don't go hire a nice, even halfway through, you don't go hire a nice, great, effective manager to be your CFO. If the guy doesn't know how to count, he doesn't know, he doesn't know arithmetic. Okay, you got to have the skills.
Yes. But that's interesting because when you talk about what you look for in terms of we versus what I did personally, that goes back to what you had just said about trying to solve problems. So it's never about, this is why I'm so great. This is about, here's what I could bring to the table. Here's how I could contribute. Here's how we can be successful together. So that's, and interestingly enough, and this was not a setup, that's actually was my experience working at your company as well, is that I was thrown in so many times in the deep end and told, listen, we know you can swim. And every time I swam, I got some water in my mouth sometimes, right? But every time I swam, and there was support there, obviously, but one of the best things that I learned coming out of that experience as well was I learned how to learn. I learned when I don't know what's going on. That's a skill all of itself. How do you get up to speed really quickly? So that's definitely kind of like a life survival skill that I've used so much more in my career.
Yeah, and if there's an environment where you can talk to people, and that's what you should look for when you're looking for a job or you get interview a job. What is the atmosphere? Can I actually talk to people? Okay.
Totally.
Well, you might remember we had a phrase just to make sure, because we were lean and keen. I mean, we didn't have zillions of people floating around, and said, all information is free and all information is available and it's free. Okay, except personal information. So if you wanted to know how something worked, if you wanted to know what it cost for that machine over there, it was available.
Yep.
That was going to help you get through. We wanted it. Okay, there was no secrets.
Yes, definitely a great experience. So I do thank you for that. You did say that you've given your notice. So you're winding down your time at Rotman. So what's next for you?
Well, for the last 20 years, 21 years, it's been Rotman corporations, 3 big corporations. And board, and then sort of at the bottom end was health and family and financial. Because I stopped making money 20 years, okay, and so you got to keep the way you have to keep living on it. I got corporate board fees and things like that, but I stopped managing big companies. So I'm transitioning from Rotman corporate and personal to family, travel, and mind/body. I have 2 daughters, one that's raising a family in London, England, and raising Brits. She fell in love with a Brit, then she married the Brit. Now she's raising Brits. Got 2 little Brits. And the other one fell in love with an Aussie, and she lives in Australia. So there's room for family and travel, because you go to either direction, there's a million other sidebars.
Yeah.
But you got to give up stuff. You got to give up. Because you can't travel a lot if you have to be back all the time. Yeah. And so the family and the travel, and then the mind body, I started many years ago. Before I met you, I got into understanding and doing mountains and things like that. And I got into Buddhism, as a philosophy. And I'll put more time into practicing and things like it's not a belief system. There's no cult factor to it, but it is a fantastic little philosophy, and I'll put more energy in that. I'm at the age where a wise psychologist at Rotman told me, Brendan, death is always on your shoulder. Oh yeah, And I'm 75 now. I only acknowledge that I'm in my 70s now. I only accepted that I'm in my 70s a week and a half ago. Okay, so I said, holy shit, that thing, might as well just get my head straightened out.
Yep.
and stay healthy and all that stuff. So that's where I'm going to spend my time. And like 20 years ago, no specific other than London and Brisbane, nothing else specific.
Yeah,
I do have
lots in between.
Oh yeah, well I do have. I'm one of the few people left in the world that uses
A day timer.
a day timer. And they said, "What? You still use that?" I said, "Don't worry, I got these. Every once in a while, I have to have a place marker. I have to make a place marker. But I keep notes. I've been doing this for 40, 50 years. There's a story in each note. I'm going to write stories that are inspired by real events. Like this not to be a biography or anything like that.
Right.
Like those you mentioned earlier. Somebody counted. We have generated out of that company. We and its predecessors. We generated 14 presidents.
Yep.
Every one of them's a great story.
It doesn't even have
to be accurate. I'll just tell a story about them.
Yeah.
You know some of them. I mean, you could. I mean, they didn't fall off the turnip truck. They had to do things, but it created presidents. No, that's a good story.
Of course.
How come? Which ones lasted? Which ones did? Which ones are happy? Which ones are sad?
Plus, you have a whole group of graduate students as well now who've graduated from Rotman who are now going on, and they're going to be doing great things as well. So it's not probably just going to be 14 presidents. It's probably going to be several more.
Well, we'll see. No, there's 500 plus graduates from our course, plus guest students, plus guest speakers, and you're right. The ones that were there 20 years ago are now 50. Well, what happened to them? One of them just became a president, actually, last week.
15. You're up to 15. 15 presidents.
Oh, yeah, exactly. One just came, but he actually came out of Rotman, so it's a new dynamic. Didn't come out of the businesses, came out of Rotman. But I did get him his job way back, and I was a mentor to him all the way through. It's a $2 billion operation. He's doing quite well. And then the other guy, thing is, the ones that are started 10 years ago, they're now 40 because they're always 30 years old. You go back every year in my class, they're always 30 years old. It's a second year MBA. Yep. Always 30 years old. And one of them said it many years ago when we asked her, she was from Eastern Europe, and we asked her, why'd you choose? Because you have to choose this course. You have to bid for it and everything. She said, why'd you choose this course? She says, well, it was the only course I could find. It was elective. You have to choose it and bid for it. The only course I could find, it was a doing course and not a memorizing course. So these people took it as a doing course. Well, what are they doing now?
Big things.
If they're just human beings, well, then they're just being. I want to know if they're human doings. See what's going on. Nice.
So that'll be nice to check up on those over time. But I wish you all the best in terms of your last year. And I hope that I do get invited to the retirement party that I'm sure you're going to be throwing for yourself.
Well, it'll be an alumni party. It'll be a coincidental event. You're right.
No problem.
If you enjoyed that interview, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, My Lemonade Stand. You can also stream it off of your favorite podcast streaming platform. Looking forward to seeing you next time.